And the speakers are Dr. Christy, Mohammad Ashar Khan, Gulrez Khan, Aaron Manwani, and the moderator is Najib Jan. The session is breaking stereotypes and discovering the significance of promoting boys in the field of social sciences.
Oh, like when I. Sure.
Hello.
I consider the middle. Yeah.
Please check your mics, otherwise I can give you a handheld mic. Are you comfortable with it? Yeah. Otherwise,
Where are they going to put them?
I prepared more remarks because I thought John R. wasn't going to come, but it's fine. I'll just make a opening remarks. I'll be very brief in the introduction, feel free to add more to your story. Better to hear from what you want to say or regurgitate it. Maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes each. 5 minutes? I mean, however long you want, 5 minutes. I don't know what else. Yeah, you can do it start at 50 minutes and then. So I'll just set the tone for 10 minutes, and then I'll do whatever you want to do. It's fine with me. It's just a conversation.
Is this picking it up? Yeah, picking up, yeah.
So we'll yeah. Start. Assalamu alaikum. Very warm welcome to this next panel, which is titled Inspiring Humanities. We have a wonderful panel here. Allow me a quick introduction. My name is Najib Jan. I teach in the Comparative Humanities Department at Habib University. We have with us here today Gulrez Khan, who is a researcher, strategist working in the financial services. He is also head of design, experience and culture at the United Bank, and formerly was also at Habib as a lecturer in C&D, the Communications and Design program. We also have Associate Professor Aaron Mulvaney, who was one of the founding members of the Habib faculty and has been with us for a long time, 11 years. So a dedicated and wonderful professor at Habib. He also studies Balochi banjo and under the instruction of Ustad Mumtaz Sabzal. He's the Associate Professor of Anthropology and Assistant Dean also of the SDB program. Mohammad Ashar Khan is a research scholar and Dean's Fellow, also affiliated with Habib. He completed his MSc in local economic development from the London School of Economics and has a bachelor's in social development and policy. We also, originally Jahan Ara was supposed to be here, but she was unfortunately unwell, and Dr. Christy Lauder very generously decided to step in and join this conversation. So Dr. Christy Lauder is also at Habib, a professor in the Communications and Design program. So I'll just make a few informal kind of remarks. When I was asked to do this panel, I was like flattered. I was like, oh wow, I made the list. Inspiring men in humanities. I was like, well, what's the criteria? How was I chosen? Obviously, very undeserved, but anyway. But then I realized, of course, very quickly that what we meant is, how do we inspire more men to join the humanities? And so, it's a complex problem. We'll have many dimensions of it elucidated. But I think, for instance, one of the big problems, both globally, but certainly in Pakistan, is when you tell people that, when I meet people and I say, I am a professor and, I teach in the comparative humanities department, they always say, well, what do you mean by humanities? And to be honest, when I was in high school, if you'd asked me the same question, I would have been like, well, what is the humanities? I'd like to say that it's a disease. It's an affliction that certain planets with life acquire over time, and it results in the destruction of life. That's what the humanities are. It's kind of a disease. But obviously, that's not the formal definition. So when I tell people, okay, comparative humanities, I teach history, I teach philosophy, I teach, when you break it down into the subjects, then people sort of say, oh, okay, of course, right? And what's interesting, therefore, I think what we have to understand very quickly is that the humanities is, it's a very loose, it's a loose umbrella term for a range of subjects, which I think, you could say, it's the study of the human condition. There's no proper really name. It's very interdisciplinary. There's a lot of cross-pollination. There's a lot of, borrowing from other disciplines. There's different methodologies. But if I was to say like one thing, I would say what distinguishes the humanities is that it's unlike the empirical disciplines, biology, natural sciences. The humanities is more speculative, right? It's more about sort of abstract, not necessarily abstract, but speculative thought. So to be honest, let's just say for the sake of the argument that what we're talking about really is how do we get men, and this is a global problem to some degree, but specifically to Pakistan, how do we get men to to take up these fields: literature, history, philosophy, the arts, photography, filmmaking, performing arts, theater. Those are the general stuff. And the question that was given to me when I was reading the abstract, how it was framed was, so we know that women, there's STEM, and we encourage women to join STEM. We need to do something for men. So I think it's a bit of a false opposite. There's no kind of bar, or there are no gatekeepers telling men that you can't do philosophy because you're just too stupid, which is not the case for STEM. Women traditionally have been discouraged from doing mathematics and sciences because those are considered to be masculine disciplines. It's not the same with the humanities. I mean, after all, my chacha and everyone's chacha is a historian, right? You all know that. Everyone's chacha is going to say, well, according to the history, I will tell you, right? But and in fact, a discipline like philosophy is oversaturated with men. In fact, it's a very kind of patriarchal, masculine still in the United States and most places. I'm proud to say, though, at Habib, most philosophers in our school are women, which is remarkable, and we're very proud of that. But we're proud of that for a kind of weird reason, right? That we don't have enough men who come to the Habib University who want to study these fields. And that's the tragedy, that's the sort of the problem that we're facing. So to give you an example, in my senior capstone seminar, I have 11 women and one man. So that's the problem. I won't speak too much at length. If there's some time, I can tell you a little bit about how and why I chose to go into this field. And I think if I was to give one answer, why don't men, join these fields? Why don't they take up the study of history and literature professionally? People do the humanities all the time. Everyone does the humanities. Everyone picks up a book on literature. Everyone's reading a biography. Everyone watches a film. Most people, enjoy photography. They do a little bit of art. So it's something that humans like to do. The humanities is just sort of a formal way of studying what is it that humans love to do when they're creative and when they're thinking. And I think the quick answer for that, if I give you the quick answer, is unfortunately it's, our imaginations and our lives are in some ways colonized by the market. When I was in high school, I would have never thought in my wildest dreams that I would be a teacher. Never thought. Because, the teacher ki value thi nahi. Even though we were learning from teachers, there was, they were underpaid. It wasn't a very inspiring field. And that was mainly because it doesn't earn money. So, when I switched from the field that I went to study physics, math, and computer science for my undergraduate. When I decided, no, I want to do philosophy, when I came back home, I went to the United States to do a liberal arts degree. When I came back home, with the exception of my parents and a few very supportive adults in my family, most people would look at me and say, "Ye to pagal ho gaya." And they would say, "Ye anthropology, ye history ka kar kya rahe hain aap? Right? Iska kya scope hai? Iske saath karenge kya?" Right? So I think, the problem is not that men don't want to go into humanities. The problem is a social one, that we don't encourage, and we don't encourage people to go into these fields because they're not marketable, and they're not sexy, and they're not going to get you fame and fortune and so on and so forth. And I think that's a real tragedy, because what we really lack, what we have here is a crisis of the human. In our globe, that's like, we've got lots of doctors, we've got engineers, and we need engineers and scientists and doctors, of course, we need that. But we don't have enough dissemination of and real appreciation for, thought and the cultivation of thought. We live at a particular moment where all life systems are collapsing. When I said humanities is a disease, that's what I mean. It's like, human beings are a virus, to quote the Matrix, right? So yeah, that's. I'll just leave it there and open the floor to some quick remarks, and then hopefully these wonderful hosts, guests, will be able to take the conversation further. So let's begin with Christy.
Hi. I am delighted to be on this panel. I am delighted to be in the opposite side. I often host panels about women in something, and there's a token man who's on it. So I'm pleased to be your token female on this panel. I find this such an interesting conversation because for so many years, humanities have been dominated by men. Our formal philosophers that we study, our historians, the thought and the creation in the humanities has largely been dominated by men. And really has become sort of a more, feminized is not the right word, but there's been a lot more women incursion into the humanities as a place that's more acceptable. And to me, this is not exactly what Dr. Najib said. It's not about capacity or thought, but it definitely is about the things that we teach men and the things that we teach men that are valuable. If money is not connected to those things, then there is no value. And that is a great loss for everyone. One, that our worth and our value should be boiled down to how much money we earn, and that we push men and women into perpetuating the system where thought and reflection and art is not valued. And I think that's probably where my interest in this topic comes from and where I'm kind of approaching this. And in particular, as somebody who does a lot of work on the internet and does a lot of work on social media, the conversations I see particularly young men having on this topic are very worrying. So I think that's probably where I'll leave it. And
I'll pick it up from there, Christy. Oh, sure. Yeah. My name is Gulrez. I started my career actually as a journalist after doing economics as an undergrad, but taking a lot of philosophy classes in my undergrad school. Um, and I realized soon enough that you could not make a career out of it. And that's where I pivoted gladly because then the newspapers collapsed in Pakistan. And that was communication was one of the fields where a lot of humanities graduates were going in mid 2000s 2010s. So I think you, Dr. Najib, really hit the nail on its head when saying it's the employability. And when education is crafted as a upward mobility or social mobility tool, if you get a good education, your employability improves and so on, then it's not surprising that humanities is not seen as the ladder to step on. And I think that's partly a challenge, of course, of the social condition, but also in how we frame education, right? A lot, in fact, good universities talk about how they literally take people from a certain socioeconomic background, and this good education helps them, improve their family's living condition and quality of life and so on, right? Therefore, people go for things that are faster, like in terms of employability, and help expand that. Um, Having said that, now I work at a bank. Of course, you need all the quant you need, but the real difference there is people who have some humanities background, and that's really where we see the difference in strategy. People who understand things more holistically are able to rise faster. They're able to understand these things better, and that's where that edge starts showing. So I think we need to rethink of how we frame it. This is not a dichotomy that you take either quant or empirical courses or humanities. It's how do we make sure that both men and women get to take both, because that's really what makes you a better rounded individual, irrespective of whichever field you go for. And then sure, you can choose employability and higher wages if that, and there's no shame in wanting to do that, especially when you do come from middle income or lower middle income backgrounds. But how do we sort of make sure that humanities is a part of your education, irrespective of what you're choosing to major in? I'll leave it that for Dr. Ali.
I don't know that I need to introduce myself since he just said my name, Aaron. I'm glad that Najib said that his chacha was a historian. My nana actually was a historian. He was an associate professor of history and dean of students at Pikeville College down in southeastern Kentucky. My own background with the humanities is almost certainly atypical. My family encouraged me to study whatever it was that interested me. And so I spent most of my teen years, my early 20s, studying music, but I was the one who recognized that there was no future in music. I continued to study, but all of the professional musicians I knew struggled all the time. My own teacher said that his wife almost left him because he was always traveling on the road to make money. And so I spent my university years trying to find that niche of stability and always coming back to the humanities. I didn't want to study music, so instead I studied linguistics. I didn't want to study linguistics, so instead I studied philosophy. I didn't want to study philosophy, so instead I studied history. And at no point did I ever get out of the humanities. But the time I was in university was the tail end of a very different time of liberal arts study in the United States. I was at the very tail end of a number of generations that came out of World War II, where you went to university either on the GI Bill or for some other reason. The idea was that education would make you a better person, not education in a particular discipline or for a specific job. And so all of the adults that I grew up around had university degrees in all kinds of things, and they worked in all kinds of fields. They were bankers, they worked in companies, they were chartered accountants. Some of them worked in the humanities. There were a few musicians, there were people who were librarians, there were people who were shop owners. But they all had this experience, they all had this background where they had this shared sense of our humanity. There's this interesting tension in Pakistan where everybody's chacha is a historian. This is absolutely true. This is true across South Asia. And many of you have relatives who have studied the arts. I noticed when I first came to South Asia many, many years ago, there were lots and lots of musicians, but they all had a real job. They either worked in the phone company or they were a banker or something. But music and dance was part and parcel of who they were, and they pursued it because it made them feel to be a wholer person. When I came to Pakistan, I noticed very quickly that there is this tension where we revere our historians and we cherish the history and we hold up poets with great reverence, but all of whom are men, and yet we do not encourage our children, our boys, to study these things. It's something that you may have in your back pocket. You study at home after all of your homework is done, after your business is over. But we don't encourage our students to pursue these disciplines. And the consequence of this, and this has been happening for decades, a couple of generations at least, the consequence of this are very linear thinking, possibly very capable professionals who have very little life outside of business, very little life outside of earning. Over the last 10 years at Habib University, I have come across multitudes of students. Usher is one of them. But many students come to Habib and they land in engineering or they land in computer science because that's what their families expect them to do. Following up on what Golrez was saying, there is a very real socioeconomic historical pressure for men in particular to go to university and get a degree that will have them earning immediately after university. And so this pressure is very real, but there are a lot of students who come and they appreciate the programs that we have, they appreciate the liberal core, they appreciate the ideas that we teach, they appreciate the requirement that they have to study some history and they have to study some philosophy because they've never been allowed to explore these topics before. And a lot of them change, and this is sometimes a source of great tension with families. What do you mean you want to leave engineering and become a poet? This has happened, it's actually happened enough times that I've lost count, but the students who make that change are often much happier than they were when they were slogging away through their engineering or their CS course. And we've had students go the other way as well, students who thought they wanted to study history and end up studying computer science. It should go both ways, but the only way that it can go both ways is if these students are provided the opportunity to study the humanities and something more vocational. If they can study philosophy and they can study music, if they can study poetry and they can study engineering. In every instance, the adult who comes out of university is a different, stronger, better, more holistic kind of human being who contributes in very different ways to the society that they're joining. I will end my first comments with something that just happened this last week. I'm teaching Introduction to Cultural Anthropology this semester. And one of my students is an extremely devout young man. And he started the semester very engaged in class, asking lots of questions, and then he dropped off for a couple of weeks. And just this past week, he came to my office, and he told me that in this class, he's a freshman, first semester student, he said, I came to this class and absolutely everything I thought I knew to be true has been challenged. Is that supposed to happen? And I thought, well, this is what we hope for as professors. Whether we teach music or anthropology or history or philosophy or computer science, what we want is for our students to feel challenged by what we have to tell them. Not necessarily changed, but we want them to think about why they believe the things that they believe. And even if at the end of the day, they conclude that their original beliefs were correct, that what they thought they knew about the world is in fact what they know about the world, we have, if we've done our job, given them tools by which they can defend those beliefs about the world in a much stronger way. And that ultimately is what the humanities provide.
Hi, so my name is Mohammad Khan, and I am an alumni of Habib as well, and now I'm teaching over there as a Dean's Fellow. My decision of pursuing humanities and social sciences was sort of rather, like accidental and also a little bit context driven. So I was born in a very vibrant community, a very vibrant neighborhood. If anyone is aware of Lalu Khed, it's in the Liaquatabad district. It's a very vibrant neighborhood, but of course, there is a very evident human deprivation over there as well, because it's a very not so much of a privileged neighborhood. So, being born over there, but I was lucky enough that my mother, who is just sitting over there, was, a working woman. And, she used to just come over here, in fact, just behind Habit City. She was working in advertisement, and which is why, it was, again, like she sent me to a good school, much better than my peers where I was living, and that kind of started developing some context in my mind that why this these conflicting ideas that some people are not privileged while I am. I have a better education versus they don't. So these kind of things kind of motivated me to explore this further. But still, there was always this social pressure of again, earning well when I get a job. And because of that reason, I always wanted to be a medical doctor. But then Habib came into existence. Habib invited to visit the university campus, and I was kind of, it's a very beautiful infrastructure. So one thing my parents were like, it's a very good university. And then, I got a scholarship over here. So then it became like a very natural choice that I wanted to go to Habib. After coming to Habib, it has become more of sort of, like a passion. I took courses in philosophy and liberal arts. In fact, my philosophy professor is just sitting over here, Professor Harris. That sort of, like further motivated me to, pursue humanities. But I'd still say that, I kept sort of a, like again, because of, you have to kind of like earn as well. So there is always this balance that while I was pursuing all the courses in philosophy and everything, I also did my master's in economic geography from the London School of Economics. That was more, again, going back to, like, a more of a social sciences oriented degree. But still, again, like, that with that very context of like, being a person who was very much into trying to understand the social dynamics of the neighborhood I was born in, that sort of really kind of motivated me to, pursue social sciences and humanities. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's really very interesting reflections. I think you've all kind of hit the nail on the head. I think there are two problems I think that can be separated. One is that in a practical purpose, we do definitely need more institutions that do offer exposure to anthropology, to history, to philosophy. And there are very few universities, in fact, hardly any in Pakistan, that afford students that opportunity. And I think when they're given that opportunity, a lot of students do realize that this is not about education. Is not primarily about a vocation. It's about the enrichment of oneself. It's about opening oneself up to what it means to exist in this very short period of time that we have. And I hate to use the word, it's sort of, it's nourishment for the soul, really. And it's really sad that after doing your inter exams or your A levels, immediately you're sort of shoved into a career track. And there's a hierarchy, right? We all know that hierarchy. If you're intelligent, you go into medicine. If you're tops, medicine, engineering, and then there's business in between, and then everything else. If you're not capable, or not as smart, not as well performing, you go into the quote unquote humanities disciplines. And this hierarchy is not predicated on intelligence. It's predicated on the market, on economic logics. And that's the sad kind of tragedy of what we're going. So there are two questions. One is, how can we encourage other universities to incorporate these subjects? Because after you're 18, 19, that's really when you begin to open your eyes. And if when you open your eyes, you're like, oh, I have to be a doctor, I have to be an engineer, you've kind of already sort of been captured by the jaws of capitalism. And you don't, I mean, you can flourish. It's not to say that, you can't. A lot of people do read and reflect and think, and they pursue the humanities in their own way. There's no doubt. We all do that. Like, my chacha, who's a historian, right? I mean, that's what he's doing. He's pursuing his self-enrichment. But to be exposed to that at a sort of, at a kind of organized professional level. And that's why I think that's the problem, is that most people think that historians, it's not a profession. Or being a teacher of arts, if you have a talent, great, but it's not a profession. And so the second problem is, the more challenging one is how do we encourage people to take these subjects so that they can create or go into this as a vocation, as a professional. And there the scope globally is limited. I mean, like, what can you do with a history degree? But I think Gulrez pointed this out. The caveat, the kind of bonus point is that if you do go through a humanities education, I think you're more likely to be able to be, you might start lower than your sort of geeky, more intense friends, but you have the vision, you're able to sort of see the problem in larger dimensions because you've been taught to think critically, you're taught to think, to hear other sides of the story, to compare different viewpoints. And when you do that in your professional life, even in your married life, right, it really enriches that element. And so if you can bring that and enrich a corporation, enrich your own household or your own tasks, and I think then there's great value to that. So yeah. But anyone else want to? We'll go for maybe another round, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
No, I think that's. I just want to bring it back to relevance today. I think one of the crises we see, and especially on social media, is that linear opinion. Sometimes in workplace and in our families, we'll see people who would be otherwise very competent and very successful, but would shock you with their opinions on certain things, right? It could be some sort of racism, ethnicism, if nothing else, at least like, they won't be aware of their privilege, things like these, saying things like, all motorbike wale sare, hata dene chahiye, things like that. Some very, very pedestrian opinions from very competent people without realizing, that they're being classist about these things, that, they're looking down on people who don't have the same sort of wealth or opportunities that they have. And part of that is that 2 or 3 decades of not teaching, not giving the opportunity to be exposed to humanities more formally. Sure, these people read newspapers or, did self-enrichment, but if you didn't have any frameworks and you weren't challenged in your formative years, and instead you were in an empirical discipline where your competence kept growing, then you reach a point of self-importance or, feeling that you're right or your opinions are right. And I think that is the crisis we see play out in our homes and social media today. And it's not just in Pakistan, I think this is a global phenomena. And the only voices of reason you see are those who've been exposed a little bit to humanities. And in that, I think, as you said, and I'd leave it to my academic colleagues, is how do we structure our programs? A lot of programs don't leave you room or don't force you early enough to be exposed to this. If we think that students by themselves will take the initiative, I think that's wishful thinking. So how do you structure programs with enough electives across and forced electives across schools? And I think that's really the challenge or the key to sort of solving this. So we don't produce men and women very competent but very linear thinking.
I think that's spot on, very much so, yeah.
I disagree a little bit with you. I think if we provide opportunities for students to study the humanities, and certainly this is proven to be the case somewhat at Habib, students will take those courses. When we were finally able to begin music instruction on campus, enrollment just exploded in those programs, in those courses. We cannot offer enough seats for the numbers of students who want to study music. Every semester in my class, I have students from computer science. Every semester. And it doesn't matter what I'm teaching, they're always there. Many students want to take these courses, and a couple of things are preventing them. I very rarely have engineering students. Why do I rarely have engineering students? It's because the structure of the education for an engineering degree simply does not allow studying anything outside of engineering. Simply does not allow it. And so a student may have that interest, but is unable to explore it. There aren't enough hours in the day. If we look at our computer scientists, going back to what Golrez was saying, sometimes we have to force them. Computer science, our computer science program has built in those requirements. You have to take a couple of courses outside of your program just to have some breadth. This is one way that we can do this, but Habib is one of the few universities in Pakistan that does this consistently. But I think it starts earlier than university. I'm going to disagree with you, Najib, just a little bit too. Students don't finish their inter or their A-level exams and are thrust into a career. Students are thrust into a career at metric or O-levels. They are told that they are capable in mathematics and therefore you will do engineering or medicine or something, or you are not good at mathematics and so you can spend your time with history or sociology. And students are, at the age of 12 or 13 or 14, they are told that the only pathway to success is a pathway of vocation. And that is what they are taught. And so those doors shut during their formative years.
No, I think that's what I meant. I mean, when I was in high school, it was a channeling system.
Yeah.
So it begins when you're at home. I mean, like even when you're 4 or 5. But that's our culture. Is that and that's how we're steered.
I'm not going to hold up the American public high school system as some sort of paragon of education, but I will say, one of the ways that it benefited me was that we were required from 7th grade through 12th grade to take English and history and science, chemistry, biology, physics, sociology, journalism. We had to take all of these courses or some subset of these courses. We all studied mathematics through high school. We all studied science through high school. We all studied composition and English and literature through high school. We all studied some of the courses that we are calling humanities. You could choose music or journalism or poetry or something, but we all had to do it in order to get our degree. And that just doesn't happen with the vast majority of students I see coming to Habib. They have to choose at age 14, oh, well, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm 14 years old and I absolutely know what I want to spend the next 60 years of my life doing. I've never explored anything because, hey, this is the first year that my parents have given me even a whisper of self-determination. And it makes no sense to me, but that's it. In order to encourage it, we need to provide those opportunities. And those opportunities can be provided at university, but I think those opportunities generally need to be provided much, much earlier to everyone.
I think that's also in part because we are colonial subjects and we've modeled our education on the British system, which does exactly the same thing. You have to choose your O-level subjects. And so what are you going to choose? Well, you're not going to choose literature and, you have to take one of the kind of like flaky subjects, but that's how it's usually posed. It's like this flaky subject, get it out of the way. So yeah, I mean, it's a structural problem and it starts early, but it's obviously it's a global capitalist problem in addition to, of course, specifically in our culture, it's a cultural problem.
I kind of, this makes me recall my own experience because I really wanted to study some, humanities and social science subject when I was doing my O levels and A levels, and the college I went to didn't even have like an option of choosing some sort of an humanities subject. The only option was choosing economics, which is probably not even like close to other social science subjects or humanities subjects. So that's where we have like a big challenge, that it doesn't really start very early on, and we are kind of restricted to follow a certain trajectory, and we kind of then if someone does not want to go beyond that, they really have a very set path and they have to just follow it. There are very less people who deviate from that already established trajectory and they go for studying other subjects and fields.
I think maybe if we have to, we can always sell it from that angle too. Like the money angle is important, the providing angle is important. We can always sell it from that because Golrez and I were both in journalism, and I can tell you that we can tell journalists who have had some sort of basic humanities training from the ones who have not. who you choose to focus on in your reporting, what you choose to find value in reporting. These are things, your ability to talk about complex issues and topics are all informed by even just like having a broad education of some kind. And that goes beyond things like journalism, which still is a field of humanities, but at least has money connected to it right at the end. But I was somebody who came from the humanities background, and I spent the first 9 years of my professional life in engineering. Why? Because engineers couldn't talk to their clients. They had no idea how to communicate with them. They had no idea to talk about like practically what they needed. And so they hired me, an English major, to come in and do that bit of connection. So there's opportunity out there. And I think largely we're all kind of getting at it, which is this narrow viewpoint harms us all. It harms us in our interpersonal relationships. It harms us in our jobs. It harms us in all sorts of ways. But also, the fact of the matter is, with AI, with the advances in technology, life is going to change really fast, and we need to equip both young men and young women with the ability to change and think on their feet and adapt instead of, okay, you're just going to be a doctor. Well, there's only so many doctors. There's only so many seats in medical schools. There's only so many lawyers. There's only so many of this. Where are the rest of us? And the rest of you, really. That's the topic of the...
I'm really proud of what we're doing at Habib in that sense. I think it's a great project, very much needed. I mean, it's needed everywhere. But I'm also very humbled and proud of students like Usher, who embrace the humanities and run with it, and have gone places and are doing interesting things. I want to ask you, Usher, though, is like, I remember my inflection point, because I went to study computer science, mathematics, physics. There was a distinct sort of moment where I knew that, okay, this is, I'm going to go to the dark side, or the side of the light, actually, right? How did you overcome, your own struggle for not really pursuing the ideal career option, but doing a kind of more reflective humanities approach to your education?
I think I'm generally a more eclectic person, but apart from that, I think like one thing which really sort of motivated me was that I had really supportive parents who didn't really have any problems with me pursuing social sciences and humanities, and also that like when I came to Habib, one thing was very clear, that I will have a job at the end of the day. So that that sort of idea of that social security was not there. That there's nothing, it's not going to waste. And that also sort of motivated me, not just me but also my parents, to like allow me to carry on that trajectory. But again, it was also a bit personal. As I mentioned, it was a bit context driven. Like I've always been interested in like things like infrastructure, things like social relationships, the kind of neighborhood I grew up in. It was very complex, very vibrant in different ways. So just trying to understand those things, with a slight bit of critical thought behind that, which was really fostered when I came to Habib. That really sort of kind of helped me in overcoming that fear that I'll not have a job. I was pretty confident that I'll have a job. Even before graduating, I had this letter that I'm going to a really good university abroad for studying, pursuing higher education further. So yeah, that's.
Thank you.
But I think I'm
Yeah.
very lucky with that as well.
Right.
So I'd say that.
We have 20 more minutes or so, and so we'll open it up to the audience for questions.
Okay, thank you for a very interesting session. I come back to the same point. What are the fields open for boys who have studied humanities? What again? In simpler words, what is the scope?
I will, as somebody in the creative field, I'll just pop in this one because that's the easiest answer. Everything most of you do when you are not actually earning that money has to do with humanities. You're watching television shows, you're reading the newspaper, you're listening maybe to podcasts, you're looking at advertiser. There's paintings right over there behind us. Where the most direct and obvious answer is that we create pretty much everything you do when you're not like doing the coding bit.
That's true.
Yeah.
But why I asked this question was, again, it's very personal. For example, my nephew, he's done his whatever from LUMS, and he ended up being a teacher in a school. So, what does that reflect? Or what?
I think I'll just repeat what Dr. Allen had said. If we think of education just as vocation, and then and that's when we feel that there's a crisis, like, oh, it's just a teacher. But also some of these in communications and design and the creative fields are, including advertising, as you mentioned, your mom, severely underpaid. Right? The salaries are really depressed, and that's not education's fault that advertising companies, even though they make a lot of money, they pay very poorly. Newspapers pay very poorly. Newspapers haven't figured out a business model that works. That is not the fault of people who study communication and humanities, right? So I think those challenges need to be resolved. Some of these industries will collapse, new industries will emerge. In that, as Christy said, if your ability to communicate complex thoughts, simplify things, produce things that make you feel good, like art, music, culture, or well-written newspaper pieces, long-form journalism, and teaching. Like, why do we not deserve really good teachers? Why do students only deserve bad quality or mediocre teachers, even at school level? We seem to, and Dr. Aaron talked about the American public school system. Like, I had friends who went to Yale and then were teaching in public schools. That's not seen as a problem because they were paid fairly.
Yes. I'm all for humanities.
I just want to say that we are all teachers here. And some of us make good money.
In a school, thank you. I love to teach, and I'm in the administration of a school. Oh, I recognize you. Okay, so basically, I'm a teacher. So let's not be desperate about that. It can lead to bigger things, and it gives you such happiness that no amount of money can buy.
I mean, where would everyone be without a teacher?
Can I add? Yeah,
It's the most important job in the world.
there's
Really?
there's this crazy tension, right? So in the United States, it's almost terrible if your children becomes a teacher, not because teaching's not an important job, but because they don't get paid. So the end game is, okay, well, what are you going to earn? However, absolutely none of us would be on this stage with our advanced degrees, with our PhDs, with our MSEs, if we hadn't had teachers at the grade school level. None of us. And yet we constantly dump on, insult, relegate that profession. I would say maybe we're unusual, I don't know. Humanities degree, she studied film, she worked in engineering for a decade. Humanities, he works in design, he's in the finance sector. I studied music in university, and my first job after university was managing the health and safety of hazardous materials using state-mandated guidelines, right? It had nothing to do with my degree. The scope, I've answered this question since I came to Pakistan 11 years ago. Scope kya hai, right? The scope of the humanities is bigger than any of us imagine. There are all kinds of opportunities, and what we're suffering isn't a lack of opportunities, but a lack of imagination.
So, these days when somebody asks me, "Ye iska scope kya hai?" मैंने कहा, "इसका telescope hai."
And I was just gonna make a quick point over here, right here in the Jeep. I'm just making a quick point. Coming from States itself, I'm constantly hearing for 2 weeks that I've been here, entrepreneurship, business. Corporate, and I'll just reflect what's going on in corporate America because I serve on a couple of boards, and you're constantly noticing the better board members don't come from finance anymore. Better board members no longer come from the business background. They're coming from humanities, and they make better board members because of critical thinking. They make better board members because they're not thinking linear. They're able to go wide, go deep. So I do want you guys to kind of reflect on that point a little bit as well. But that's what I've been noticing in the past decade. is that as you're seeing the corporate ladder grow, you're noticing better leadership coming from the side of humanities rather than somebody coming from business finance degrees.
I would just quickly add on that point that I have a bit of a tension when I hear things like, on the one hand, we need to tell our students precisely these stories because they think this is a non-employable or non-productive degree. So we have to say, no, it is. You can be like, our former head would go around saying things like, you do a liberal arts degree, you can become Steve Jobs. He did a liberal arts degree. But I personally think, however, that should not be. One doesn't do the humanity. One doesn't really enter into these fields, especially philosophy and literature, maybe others, but because you want to make money. I mean, I think the primary impetus should lie elsewhere, but it's also, the reality is we need to say things like that as well. And it's true, and it's important. So there's a tension.
Leaders exist outside of the corporate sector.
Yeah.
Leaders exist in policy making, leaders exist in government, leaders exist in education, leaders exist. I mean, yes, we do this all the time. We make this argument. If you want to be successful in corporate, in the corporate sector, you have to study humanities. Look at all these people. And I agree, that's a very weak argument overall. But leadership, wherever you find it, at the community level, is enriched through the study of the humanities.
Absolutely. Haris?
I have a very quick.
Oh, sorry. Did somebody else want to quickly?
Just one thing, this reminds me of kind of an incident that, the world is generally going crazy these days. So I was having a conversation with my friend who studied gender at the LSE, and, like when we say, what are you studying, and you say you're studying gender, they're like, what kind of job will you get? And, this was the question asked from her, from one of the fellows sitting with us on the coffee table. And, then she replied that, that she already had an offer from Facebook. So she was going to Facebook as, for the policy thing, formulating policies at Facebook or for social media. And then she replied that who will be there to control like terrible men like you if there was no a gender policy person inside the policy making side of Facebook. So again, these things are increasingly becoming more and more relevant, but again, by the virtue of the world becoming more and more crazy as well. So we will have more and more opportunities, considering that we also have more and more troubles in the society these days.
Okay,
Yes, and,
next question, Haris.
Talking about troubling times and troubled times, I think Asher has already responded to the question that I am going to ask, that like we live in a world where the unsayable and the unspeakable is normalized to a degree, to a level which it has not been normalized before. Like while we are sitting here, of course, having this wonderful conversation with all of you, if you were to turn to, Al Jazeera right now, there is a live cast genocide, playing out on the screens right away. Then, like you made a reference to toxic masculinity. I mean, in Pakistan, it's a huge problem. It's a massive, and it's just totally normalized. It's and in this kind of world, where the unsayable, the unspeakable is more and more regular, everyday, normalized, sort of it's happening at every instance. Don't you think that in education in the humanities or something that like we try to do specifically in comparative humanities and so on, that kind of deep immersion in literature and philosophy and like it's going to, equip you with thinking skills which would help you be a more effective, impactful citizen in the future?
Christy?
I actually have been thinking this entire time, wondering if it's going to be a good time to bring it up, that I really like that this panel follows the panel that you're on, because the question of yours is, how we deal with the changes of the Anthropocene, the answer is going to come from here. And not solely, right? Not solely from humanities, but also, I actually think these two answers are connected. One of them is that by hook or by crook, people who are in the humanities are encouraged to think beyond the humanities. So the reason that you can get people at high levels of boards or because we've been told to think past the humanities for any number of reasons and to think about large scale problems. And what's the largest scale problem that we are dealing with right now? We are dealing with climate change, we're dealing with environmental destruction. This is vital. And on a really pragmatic, I'll go back to the original question of this panel, which is how do we encourage men, or why should we be encouraging men in humanities? The pragmatic answer is that men still hold most of the positions of power. They hold most of the positions of influences. They still hold most of those board jobs, I'm going to guess, when you go into those rooms are largely going to be men. Most of our politicians are men. Most of the generals are men. We need people in those positions who have had these thoughts, who have thought past these ideas, who are not opening up necessarily, but just open to other possibilities. We're never going to change. We're never going to answer the question of climate change and Anthropocene. We're never going to change and answer how do we handle genocide? How do we stop genocide until we are involving people who have real positions to make change. And to me, that's the whole circle of this conversation.
I think there was a student just yesterday, well, a couple of days ago in my PAMSA section asked, well, we were talking about the problems that engineering and CS students have with PAMSA, which is Pakistan Studies. It's, it's intense course, and why do I have to waste my time doing all of this? So they said, why do we have to do this? And I said, well, in short, so that so you don't become a fascist. I thought, let me answer this very quickly. But, we have this distinction that everyone knows is that, between the hard sciences and the soft sciences. So we're the soft sciences. And I think we need softness. The genocide is a result of this kind of hardness plus fascism, right? Mixed in with economic interests. So, our devils are the, economic interests, hardness, masculinity. Like, we need to be softer. We need to be gentle people. And that's part of our original tradition, I think, originary tradition. I mean, all of our exemplars were soft people, not greedy. They didn't build big houses. They didn't leave monuments and structures. They left ideas and thoughts and, an openness to existence. And we've lost a sense of that. And in some ways, the humanities is really the new citadel of, it's a new religious vocation, to be honest, because humanities used to be religion, right? But yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think Christy also answered it. Does anyone else want to quickly add? All right, let's have another question.
My name is Mohammed Ali. I read somewhere. I read somewhere in the United States, 87% of students facing bullying. And out of one teacher in 4 are abused by students. Well, we have no system in Pakistan. Every institution is failed. We have no counting list, So where is the United States? Which is so much developed.
As the non-American in this panel, I will take that.
Hey, I'm not an American.
Issues are there in every society, irrespective of their level of development. And I think was panel ka point yahi hai कि you can be developed, you can do hard sciences, and you can be an engineering prowess, and you can be like Germany, but you can still be Nazi. And in fact, it's not surprising that countries that are driven solely by economic interest, hard sciences, and without softness end up becoming very fascist countries, right? We have example next door in India. Great development, economic development, IITs, those Indian Institute of Technology, very revered institutions, but the country is becoming a fascist, hellhole for minorities and stuff. Same in Pakistan. The more you focused on hard sciences over the last 20, 30, 40 years in engineering and producing more doctors and engineers, as a society, you've regressed. So it's not surprising that the more developed you become without any softness, you will become more fascist, more bullying, and actually more problematic. Yeah. So I think it falls exactly in that example that we've been talking about.
I think bullying is not an American problem or a European problem. It's a power problem. And of course, America has a lot of power. So, what we do in the humanities is, I also tell, if I was to give a short definition, it's a critique of power. How do you hold power accountable? How do you make power good power? Not all power is bad, right? So it's a larger question, not restricted, to one group or one people, as you mentioned. So
I'll just take a direct shot at your question, which is the issues that we see in America on the macro and the micro scale are connected very deeply to this devaluing of the humanities. And we've been doing that for decades in the US. And we are able to elect basically a proto-fascist into office because we have changed what our value systems are and we've changed where we place importance. We've seen it in the rise of right-wing politicians in the past decade. And it is deeply, deeply connected to the devaluing of widespread education, but also the devaluing of humanities in general, and particularly for men, that they no longer, that is a feminine concern. And we all know that feminine concerns are lesser concerns.
We have time for maybe one more question.
My name is Fawzul Azim. Great panel, first of all. I have a similar experience like yours, studied in America, tried to escape all the elective programs by going to Professor Singh. I'm paying 28 rupees for each dollar, so I need to get the hard sciences instead of the humanities. And finally, my psychology professor, said, no way you're getting out of this, you have to go through that class, and that changed my world. So definitely we need more humanities to make us better humans. And it should be mandatory and I think the dictatorship, fascist regime that we have in Pakistan, maybe, get some guy at Higher Education Commission to change the rules and regulations and that.
We need a Gandhi.
Well, that's a separate debate. I think we could go into it a longer term. Yeah, we need multitudes of those leaderships.
Yeah, I mean, we're a militarist society.
Absolutely.
Where the authority, the army has authority not because they've earned it or they're legitimate, because they have force. You take that force away, they have nothing, right? That's why they need the force. Fascism requires a constant reapplication of violence in order to ground itself. And so the humanities is connected to bullying, to violence, and that's why we need it. Because if we don't want violent societies, we want a society of human beings who value life.
Absolutely.
So I think thank you for your comment.
Adding on to that,
Sure.
How do we take that in the future with AI coming in, all the technology changes happening, the change that's coming in?
That's another panel.
Humanities, like you said, it's the only way humans are going to be of any value when we are creative.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like the Matrix, we are going to be batteries.
100%. You've raised a very, very important question, and that's our next big challenge.
If you're interested in AI, Habib's also going to be having an AI conference in the spring. We'll be talking about that.
Right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for sitting here patiently listening. Thank you to the panelists for their wonderful insights. Thank you.